What was going on in the world at that time?
Watergate was going on in the world at that time. That was a major, focus. That actually was something that it made us feel determined not to be corrupt, because Watergate brought out so many instances of dishonesty, actions that were corrupt by lawyers. And we already felt that we were part of that professional group by virtue of being law students. We sort of had taken on that professional mantle. And so it was humiliating. And it was humiliating to see the President of the United States in such a predicament. But that, if you think back in time, that the Vietnam War and Watergate in the early 70s were sort of the events out there that preoccupied a number of us. And a number of us had been protesters against the Vietnam War. Another, sort of to put it in perspective, Roe v. Wade had been decided about 9 months before we started law school. And we didn't really realize the momentous nature of that decision. It was another decision that we had to read, except that it wasn't in the casebook. It had to be handed out by Charles Ayres on a mimeograph sheet or something. But it was, that over time we realized that had been a big break with precedent. And Justice Blackmun actually came out during our 3 years at the law school at least once and spoke to students, and he was, I don't think he knew yet how that decision would be used against, would continually be sort of the reason he would be in the limelight. And it just, continued until his death last year. That was what he was known for. And I don't think he knew that back then when he came out and visited us.
What would you say is the defining characteristic of the U of A College of Law?
What would I say is the defining characteristic of the U of A College of Law? Based on my experience as a student, I think that the size of the student body allowed for real friendships to develop. The diversity of the student body was a real plus for all of us. And we met people from not just diverse ethnic or racial groups, but diverse life backgrounds. And that, when I think back on my experience at the law school, the intellectual stimulation that was provided by the faculty was wonderful, and it was made more wonderful by the fact that we talked about these ideas among such a diverse group of classmates, so that it all worked right. Now, I liked law school a lot, and that's why I do what I do for a living. But there were a number of friends of mine who didn't like law school. So it's not, I think our law school today in the year 2000 is a much more friendly place to students than it was back in the early 70s. And there were a lot of people who didn't feel good about their treatment by the institution. So I have a somewhat, it's a view that's just very subjective, but I felt like I felt that there was a very good mix of great teaching from the faculty and this just wonderful group of students.
If you were to change one thing about legal education, what would it be?
If I could change something about legal education, I think I might, let me think about this one.
can go to the next one.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of a weird question. I can't really, I mean, I don't know what one thing I would change.
If you were to convey a message to future law students, what would it be?
I mean, these are hard questions to, try to give some answer that's thoughtful when you're just boom off the top of
Okay.
your head. I think if I were to give a message to future law students, I would encourage them to take advantage of their time in law school, to view it as the time where they have the luxury of thinking about questions that are interesting and provocative, and discussing, trends in the law, thinking about ways that the law might be improved, working with faculty that they admire. It is a luxurious time, but a lot of students today are driven to get out. Some of that is economics, for sure. And this is kind of the necessary 3-year training period, but it's all about getting to the end. And I don't know whether, I would hope that there could be a bit more enjoyment of these 3 years. It's a lot of students who don't have that attitude have come back down the road to me and said, I wish I would have taken these courses. I didn't know then that the practice is so demanding that you don't really have time ever to sit and think. And so it's just, to view it as a time of intellectual enrichment would be a one piece of advice. There's probably a lot more that I could say to students.
What would you like the law school to accomplish in the future?
I think that the law school could do a lot more than it does now in helping encourage people to think about the delivery of legal services to lower middle income and indigent people, to people that can't afford the astronomical legal fees that are often charged by lawyers. There's a problem in our society that so much requires legal representation. So much of what we do in basic living requires the advice of a lawyer. We've managed to, I don't mean this in a bad way really, but lawyers, the law affects almost every realm of life. And if we don't have a system that's accessible to people out there, we're really cutting them out of a certain, certainly opportunity. And the trend has been in the last decade or so, for sure, to cut back on the kinds of things legal aid, legal services corporation can do. And there's just a huge need for legal representation for folks that don't have a lot of money. And the law school, I think, should take that on as more of a responsibility than it does now. There's been a kind of disconnect historically between legal education and the legal profession for a lot of reasons, and that's being corrected to some extent now. A lot of critics, high-level critics of that disjuncture have had some impact, but there still, I think, is a tendency for the law schools to be able to sort of insulate themselves from the really pressing problems about law and lawyers and our population out there. So I'm not even sure what that would entail, but maybe at least have more creative curriculum that explicitly looks at this problem.